So now I want you to tackle the troublesome two, or double trouble. When we first met, I remember telling you, one of my favorite authors is, Jean de Lumeau, and his History of Fear in the Western Mind. He explains how guilt and fear have been used as instruments of domination and coercion. So, what is your practical advice for those who are victims of the troublesome two? In other words, what kind of coping mechanisms do you suggest countering the use of guilt and fear?
Nice. Sure. Well, you have to make a decision. Guilt and fear, if we just use that simple language in the psychological sense, because we kind of understand guilt and fear, fairly normal conversational language, we have to understand that guilt and fear are part of who we are. And there is a healthy guilt and there's a abusive guilt making. And that abusive guilt would be self-abusive. And that comes because you were taught, somebody taught you to be self-abusive. And I'm going to argue this is the punch, that the reason that we've been taught to fall into the use of guilt and sin against ourselves, not just guilt and sin that's coming from the church or the government or some authority, which it does. You can see that oppression to me is both interior, what I do with it, and what's coming from the outside. So how do I intervene on that cycle, that vicious cycle of, do I just repeat interiorly and say the same things that the exterior authorities are saying to me? I have to intervene with full responsibility. That's my advice, to take full responsibility for guilt, fear, sin, these fear-based patternings, as I call them, as self-generated first. Yes, they're also coming from the outside, but they're self-generated. So am I repeating the system, right? The victim cycle. Am I going to make a decision to say, no, I'm not going to be the victim and I'm not going to pass it on? You hear that a lot in families of trauma, families of addictions. And I say, I'm the generation that's not going to pass it on. And so then I have to take a path. I have to make the discipline to basically not do that. So the punch is, those were just little jabs. Now the punch is to realize that you, all of us, are part of a coping culture. And that's a big generalization, but I do not mind punching that one out as a generalization. In other words, simply, we've been taught to cope with our hurts, the things that happen to us that hurt us, not just physically, but psychologically is mainly what I'm talking about. And sin and fear is just part of a complex of those kinds of interior hurtings to our interior being and integrity. We have to be responsible that we are all bought into more or less this coping culture. What's the alternative? A healing culture. And so when anybody asks me, how do we better cope with right? I always go, okay, now that's a language already to me tainted. It's already constructed within the oppressive system. They would rather have us cope. I'm just saying but it's the whole system, this fear matrix, this oppressive world society that tends to dominate. That's my view, of course, and it's an arguable view. Some people say, well, we don't live in an oppressive society. I say we do. And we have to realize that we haven't been taught healing processes anymore. We forgot our natural healing process for the most part. And that's why there's this whole wellness, well-being, healing discourse that's come, recover your soul. It's because we've lost to understand how we heal naturally. And this is a great part of the indigenous traditions. They have these healing rituals and so on. So a lot of cultures have them, not just indigenous per se, but it has to be learned. And so I have to make a choice to realize, I'm choosing to cope rather than to heal. And so we could then go in, well, how do you define a healing process? And that's many things. So basically I'm saying that the worst fear, cycling, vicious cycling that goes on, that feeds all oppressive cycling of all kinds and forms, is coming from a wounded, hurtful injury that is not healed inside not only me, but them and them and them and them and them and them and the whole culture. And so why do we have therapists, right? And so on, because people are not always healing that interior. But we have to do it together as peers. We can't rely on professionals and pay professionals. That's ridiculous. That's a totally commodified process. Yes, you use them if you have to, but we have to learn a peer educational process, and that's my agenda. That's my mission on how